This morning, we are having a conversation about the human bridge, both the movement and the book. And you will be hearing from an amazing group of people, Ian Fuhr, Nina de Klerk, Nyeleti, and Tessa, Nyeleti Magadze and Tessa Dooms. And Ian, I think we are just about ready to start formally, having done the pleasantries and welcomed everybody. And we're so excited about this amazing group of people that are with us today. My name is Louise van Rhyn. I feel very privileged this morning to be the host of this conversation, the launch of a movement, and an introduction to the people behind this movement. You're going to hear from Ian Fuhr, who many of you might know as the founder of Sorbet, also a very seasoned coach, consultant, practitioner. We'll do a formal introduction to Ian in a minute, but just so that you know that you're going to hear from Ian Fuhr. You will hear from Professor Nina de Klerk, who is the co-author of the book, The Human Bridge, that has recently been published. And you're going to hear a lot more about this book. The subtitle for the book says Human Bridge, Racial Healing in South Africa. You'll also be hearing from Nyeleti Magadze, who is a change leader, a experienced consultant currently working at the Constitutional Hill Trust, and will be the CEO of the Human Bridge Movement NPC. And lastly, you'll hear from Tessa Dooms. Many of you will know Tessa. She's a sociologist, a development practitioner, and an advocate for justice and equity in South Africa. So those are the people you're going to be hearing from this morning. And I'm going to start us off by just introducing you to Ian Fuhr. Now, Ian, I don't think Ian remembers this, but many years ago, that must have been 5-6 years ago, I was at a Cape Town Business Chamber event, and Ian told the story about Sorbet. And I remember being completely spellbound. I left that session thinking, everybody in South Africa needs to hear this man. I came back to my husband. I said, you really need to ask Ian Fuhr to come and speak to you. So that's the person you're going to meet today. He is described as a serial entrepreneur. He has been involved in many entrepreneurial ventures. You're going to hear some of his story today. I don't want to give any of it away, really. But we know him because of Sorbet, and now he's leading the Hatch Institute, which is a coaching and consulting business. And today we are hearing from Ian as the founder of the Human Bridge movement. So Ian, without any further ado, could you please get us going and tell us a little bit about the background, your background, and then also the background to the Human Bridge book and the movement.
Right. Thank you so much, Louise. Thanks for the introduction and welcome, everybody. It's great to have so many people online here with us this morning. So I'm going to take you back a little bit, just to show you a little bit of my own history so you can understand how I got involved in all of these things, particularly on racial healing, social justice, which has been the cause of my whole life, something that I've focused on since I was very young. And the beginning of it was in 1976 when I had just dropped out of university and I was working for a record company and being a bit of a singer and stuff like that. And my older brother comes back from the States and he says, I've just seen this huge, big retail chain called Kmart in the States, departmental discount stores, and we need to open one of these in South Africa. So I had no education, no nothing. I didn't know anything about retailing. He said it should be aimed at the black market. I knew nothing about the black market. I was 22 years old, very naive and a little bit stupid. And so I said, okay, well, which one of us is we when you say we? And he said, well, you. He pointed at me because he was busy with the business. You're going to open Kmart in South Africa. So being naive and stuff, I said, sure, no, that sounds like fun. And we started planning the opening of Kmart. I made a few fundamental errors. Firstly, I didn't know much about trademarks, so I just used their name, Kmart, and to make it worse, I used their logo, as well, which was really dumb. But we operated like that for 12 years before Kmart found out and then came to change us, and we had to change our name to Supermart. Nevertheless, we planned to open in 1976 in June, but unfortunately, at the time, it was the same month as the Soweto uprising, which caused all kinds of panic and chaos and volatility in South Africa. So we delayed the opening, and we opened up on the 1st of March, 1976. So on the opening day, we advertised some specials, some really crazy specials, and half the country arrived because they were so low. And there was panic and pandemonium. The police thought it was another uprising in the middle of town. This is in Jeppe Street, Johannesburg. And it took us quite a while to convince them that this was a store opening and not an uprising. And eventually the crowd settled down, and there you can see the queues around the block, which lasted literally for 3 days. People came from far and wide. I was the only white person in the business. The staff were all black, and the customers were all black. So you could see there, spot the white boy in the middle of it all. And I really didn't know how to communicate with my staff. So I asked this guy, Ralph Mamela, to help me with my communication, because I had no idea. I was too young, too white, too naive to be able to know how to manage people at that stage. And he tried to help me for a little bit. And then one day we were having these consumer boycotts going on in South Africa at the time, where black people were boycotting white-owned stores. And so one of my staff comes running into me and says, listen, Ralph Mamela, my guy, is out in the streets handing out pamphlets promoting a consumer boycott of our own store, which was really hectic. And I felt totally betrayed. And I called him in and I dumped on him. I said, how could you do this to me? And he said, look, I'm sorry, Ian. The problem is every morning on the way into work and the way home, I'm harassed by the police, either me or my friends or my family. And it's really difficult. He said, I'm suffering, Ian. We are all suffering. We cannot live like this anymore. And he said something so powerful that really changed my ideas and my mindset for the rest of my life. He said, for me, Ian, it's freedom first and work second. And I realized, wow, we cannot ignore the socio-political environment in which people are living and working. So I said to him, okay, you need to really help me now. You can stay. I'm not going to fire you. I want you to help me to understand everything that's going on in South Africa, and particularly from a political point of view. And so my lessons began. He said, okay, but you have to come to Soweto first, and then I'll show you everything. I said, sure, no problem. So off I went, and I saw life in Soweto, which was just an amazing eye-opener for me, a huge awakening. I had no idea that such a place existed and how people lived there. It was like having a second country in our country. I'd grown up in a very privileged background, and I had no idea this stuff was going on. So it was a major shift in thinking, in paradigm. And so it became the beginning of my journey on racial healing and justice and social justice. So I jump a little bit there, and then I went into the music business. I won't go into all the details, but I met Caiphus Semenya. Many of you will know Caiphus. We were the first company in South Africa to have a black director and shareholder, and there he sits on the left-hand side. His name was Carl Molakomi. He introduced me to Caiphus Semenya, who was a musician living in America, and his wife, Letta Mbulu. They were huge artists in South Africa at the time in the early 80s. And we released records of theirs. I did a deal with Caiphus, and we went into a partnership arrangement. I started a record company called Moonshine Records, and I released the albums of Letta Mbulu and Caiphus Semenya, which were so successful that we also got other people involved, Hugh Masekela and the Soul Brothers. And what happened was, because Hugh was living in the States, he couldn't come to South Africa. He wasn't allowed here. So we bought a recording studio and in a truck, and we took it up to Gaborone in Botswana. We set up a studio, and there we are in Botswana, Hugh on the right-hand side, me with the short shorts on the left, and the other three guys were the Soul Brothers, and the guy in the middle is a guy called Stuart Levine. He was the producer of the album, and we recorded an album called Techno Bush. amongst other things there. Then I jump again to Sorbet. I'm not going to go into any of that, but from a race relations point of view, when we started Sorbet in 2004, I was invited to go to a product launch. And there I was the only guy there. It was all young women. And I was already 51 years old at the time I started Sorbet. And so I went there, and all these young women were a bit skeptical of this old man hanging around. And they were mainly white. In fact, virtually all the women were white, other than the people serving the tea and the coffee and the drinks and stuff and the food. So I went up to one of the managers of the company. I said, where are the black people? And I was a little bit cheeky. And I said, was there like a transport problem? Or maybe a taxi strike or something like that? And then she said, no, that's nothing to do with it. And this is an upmarket brand, and it's bought by people that have the money, and most of those people are white. And generally speaking, white women do not like to have black therapists working on their skins. And I was shocked to hear that, especially coming from my experience and my background with working with black people. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm not going to make a fuss here, but I thought to myself, we need to change that. And this is one of the things that I must admit I'm quite proud of, is that after 15 years of running Sorbet, it was over 90% were people of color in terms of our staff. So we jump all of there. Then I go to the Hatch Institute, and we start working on cultureneering and culture in the workplace, and then also racial healing in the workplace. We start to run racial healing workshops, which are really powerful workshops. So you get people together from different races, and they start to get to know each other, learn from each other, and start to understand the need for healing. And so this kind of set me off. I started thinking about racial healing in a bigger way, realizing that no one is born with hatred and all the psychological damage that has happened over the years. And I started to realize that in the workplace where I was consulting, race was slipping off the radar in the work environment. People were not talking about race as much as they were before. And I thought, no, this is not good. We can't have that, because we haven't yet healed the people here of this country. There's too much damage still. And when I was working in these organizations, it became very clear that race was still a big underlying problem in the workplace. And I thought, okay, we need to do something about this. So I decided to write a book about racial healing and reached out to Professor Nina de Klerk and a number of influential contributors. Nina at first was asked just to do the research, but she ended up doing so much more. She became a co-author at the end of the day, and I thank Nina so much for her contribution to the book. The picture on the right is the launch that we had at Gibbs, the first launch of the book, and the guy on the right is Lukanya Kalata, who is one of the contributors in the book. He wrote one of the essays, and Lukanya's father, his name was Fort Kalata. He was one of the Craddock Four, the 4 people that were murdered by the security services in 1985. I think a lot of us will have heard about them. So one of them was his father, and he writes about this in the book. These are the contributors that we had that we have in the book. All of those you can see on the right-hand side. Some well-known names and some very influential people have contributed to this book. And some of them are very emotional, personal experiences that they write about. Very powerful indeed. So South Africa has moved beyond apartheid, but not beyond racial polarization. And that's pretty much what this book is about, is how do we deal with the challenges we face as a result of what has happened in South Africa over hundreds of years. The book is available now in the bookstores, exclusive books, and then also online through Take a Lot, and also online through the Hatch Institute. You can order it from us as well. Just a few things about the Human Bridge and the principles. Okay, it presents 2 key components of racial healing. Okay, it is a psychological bridge over the racial divides and the polarization of our traumatized country. It is also a bridge that carries us from our troubled past into a sustainable future for all our people. So it's a very powerful coming together of the people rather than the separation and the division, which has been so much a part of our lives throughout our history. So the book examines the deep-rooted causes of racial polarization in South Africa and then outlines the practical steps required for our journey towards racial healing. It goes beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion and takes a deep dive into the evils of racism and the psychological, social, political, and economic damage it has wreaked upon this country. So with that, I thank you, and that's the end of my little introduction. I'm going to ask Louise to now introduce Professor Nina de Klerk.
So, thank you, Ian. We've just got a sense of you. There will hopefully be a lot more opportunity for people to engage with you, and we want to invite anybody in the any of the delegates, if you've got a question. And then there's a request, Ian, that we enable the chat. So I don't know whether that's something that you can do from your side as the host.
Oh, you're asking me tough questions now.
Yeah, I know. So let's see. I'm going to leave you.
Have we not put those in the question and answers, the comment stuff?
So there's we can see in the question, and someone said, please can you enable the chat in the Q&A, but we might need some technical help. If someone is able to provide technical help, please let us know. How do we enable the chat? Because apparently the chat is not enabled. Just seeing whether I can see something. I can't. So I'm going to, in the meantime, introduce Nina de Klerk to you. So Nina is an academic. She is a published researcher and emeritus professor of strategic communication at the University of Johannesburg. She has many years of industry experience, and she's participated in many different transformation initiatives, both in South Africa and abroad. I have to say to you, one of my go-to places nowadays when I want to introduce someone is I go to ChatGPT and say, how would you introduce Nina de Klerk? Which is not always exactly the same as what the people tell me. So Nina, I just want to say to you, ChatGPT has a very strong sense of you. And one of the things that Chat says, it says, Nina's work bridges divides and inspires change, making her a guiding light in our shared journey towards a more inclusive and compassionate South Africa. So the story is out there, and we look forward to hearing your contribution to this morning's conversation.
Thanks so much, Louise, for that introduction. I'm quite curious. I'm going to check on ChatGPT to find out what other stories and myths are being spread. I hope I'm not a cricket or tennis captain. I've seen that before. But anyway, my job here this morning, I see as just for those who haven't read as yet The Human Bridge, just to highlight a few key themes that Ian and I have identified in the book and wrote about. This will give you further context for the movement. And the first theme is what Ian has just now explained so beautifully, and that is the acknowledgement that change begins with oneself. The notion that racial healing is about confronting and harnessing our own demons, unlearning our own racial stereotypes, and that the willingness to acknowledge these and to be vulnerable is the heartbeat of racial healing and of psychological empowerment. Psychological empowerment is a very important construct we used repeatedly in the book. Another theme we touched upon is the debate about race versus racism and which one is real. Now, while we referred to the scientific and critical race theories and so forth, we chose not to dig too deep into all these academic theories And our conclusion was simply that it is perceptions of race that are real, because these are almost hardwired from the cradle and through the way in which people are socialized. Yes, another theme that we highlighted is the importance of taking the Constitution out of the closet and living it. The acknowledgement that while race may be a social construct, one cannot ignore the way, which Ian has just also explained, the way in which perceptions of race have deeply impacted upon our lived reality, on our economic, on our political, on our educational and health systems, and on deepening inequality. And that taking a colorblind or a so-called non-racist approach to race can inevitably lead to turning a blind eye to racism and its consequences. At the same time, we stressed in the book that racial healing is not about attacking, accusing, or blaming white people for the wrongs of the past. It is not about trying to make them feel guilty or ashamed of their heritage. It is not woke new racism that paints all white people as guilty and all Black people as victims. Something which, apart from polarizing people further, is increasingly experienced also here in South Africa as patronizing and condescending by many Black authors and academics. So race should not be weaponized. It was thus, as I think it becomes clear to you now, that it was not the purpose of the book to become embroiled in too many academic definition and debates and identity politics, or even constructions of race in countries abroad. We did not take our cue from abroad. We regard the challenge of racial diversity in South Africa as unique and complex, or call it uniquely complex. It is different from other countries where challenges around racism and ethnocentrism run perhaps even deeper under the surface. And dare I say, I think this has been confirmed by the outcome of the American elections. So in fact, for this very reason, and this is something that Morris Mtombeni has stressed, South Africa has in fact earned the right to talk about racial healing because our history has made us uniquely qualified to embark on this journey. Another theme that we touched upon is the notion that you can't focus on only changing the systems without fixing the relationships between the people in the system. One example we highlighted is the Government of National Unity. We believe that relationships are everything because that is what keeps the system together, and without paying attention to relationships, which means healing relationships, the systems, we believe, will remain stuck, which does not mean that systems should not change. If you have a 65% youth unemployment, if the top 10% holds for 75% of wealth, and if 75 murders are committed each day, of course, we need to take a hard look at the system. But the fact is, you cannot change the system without changing the relationships between the people in the system. So that's why we say the process of racial healing is bottom up and top down. It begins with individuals, it works itself up through the community and institutions, and then systems from where it should work down again. So whilst we are digging deep into all the social, psychological, and economic effects of racism, at no point we are forgetting the toxic effects of ethnocentricity and xenophobia, which are as evil as racism. So for us, racism in the book was never only a black and white issue. We therefore also had a lot to say about what some of our collaborators, and I refer here to people like Loretta Ferris and Padma Moodley and Jonathan Janssen, about the erasure of coloredness, color of blackness, the invisible brown, as well as the exclusion of people of color via what could easily be perceived as the old concept of groupthink, which caused apartheid, of course. And we also put the recent Afrikaner declaration under a bit of scrutiny. So moving away from group or tribal or herd think is an important theme in the book. A strong theme in the book is racial healing in the youth, which we believe is the greatest gift we can give our children. While many of them all of them were born post-apartheid, or called the so-called born frees, many of them are still shackled in poverty, or feeling that they are paying for the sins of their fathers, or in fact feel no sense of belonging. A strong theme in the book is unpacking the dynamics of restoration versus revenge, and understanding that the need for revenge works against racial healing. Our message is not to underestimate the power and complexity of revenge, especially when it is dressed up as a quest for justice due to the wrongs of the past, be it the Holocaust, be it apartheid, be it the Boer War. And of course, we refer to many examples all over the world, but also in this country, like Kill the Boer, or farm murders, or MK versus the ANC, etc. The message is simply that revenge feeds on revenge and leads to a renewed cycle of racism. And then one of our themes, and it's very important too for the movement, is that healing is not easy. It's not a quick fix. It's hard work and it's ongoing. One can be anti-racist 1 minute and then racist. It's hard to harness your own demons, as Leon Wessels also described. And it's even more difficult to discuss it with others, because the key to racial healing, which is a key theme in the book, is dialogue. Talking to others, not through others or at others. Understanding each other's cultural histories and traumas and blind spots. For healing to begin, hurt needs to be spoken and heard. But talking is not where it stops. There comes a point where you stop talking and just do it, as Rassi did, where you start walking the talk. And all of this can take years. You need to start young, you need to get backing, you need to instill trust, you need to empower others so that they in turn can empower others. So I think, and that's in conclusion, the overall theme running like a golden thread through the book is that one should embrace complexity. We should leave the world of or and embrace the world of and. Because in the world of or, things are black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, us or them, and so we can go on. Once we enter the world of and acknowledge that there's good and bad, right and wrong in each of us, once we acknowledge the yin-yang, we can start constructing the human bridge. As somebody, which we quoted in the book, recently remarked, you cannot play a leading role in a complex situation if your choices are limited to one of two. And by the way, I cannot help thinking that that is exactly what went wrong in the American election. To build a human bridge, you need to embrace complexity, you need to welcome diversity and disruption, and you need to acknowledge the existence of multiple truths. The narrative should change. And that's what we need, and that's how we conclude, is a new narrative, a new activism, and that is where the movement comes in. So over to you, Nyeleti.
We're going to go to Nyeleti in a minute. Thank you very much, Nina. I really want to encourage people to get hold of this book. It is widely available at the moment if you go to exclusive books. And if you struggle to get hold of it, please let us know so that we can talk to the publishers. But it really is a book worth reading. And Nina has just given you a taster of it. And, you know, one of the things that I love about what you and Ian have done is that it is very much an invitation to participate in a coming together rather than being in a confrontation across racial boundaries. So just an update on the chat situation. We are all learning how to use the various mechanisms of Zoom. And so in this case, it looks like we should have made the chat available to people before we start the webinar. So we are inviting you to just share your thoughts or comments, or even if it's just a comment, please feel free to share that in the Q&A, and we will be responding. So there are two questions already. Elton is asking, will the recording be available to all of you? Absolutely. We will be sharing the recording to everybody who registered for this webinar today, even though the people who weren't able to attend, I think there were something like 300 people registered, of which 133 are on the call. And that's often because people know they can't really join, but they're going to be getting the recording. And then Brian Day says, I can't find the book on Takealot. I'll try exclusive books tomorrow. Brian, we do need to put some pressure on the publishers. So if you can't find it where you are, please make sure that you reach out to us and let us know so that we can get them to get those books out. And then Dani Maton says the book is available for Kindle on Amazon. That's a recent edition. We're very happy to say that it is now available on Kindle, and it's been a joy to read it. I've also been reading it on Kindle, and it's been a joy to read. Then Rudy Bass is saying he has found the book on ourbooksdirect.com. So it looks like that's a mail order company like Takealot, which should be able to share it. Vedette Radford said she started reading the book and she's loving the approach, and she thinks that the thinking is powerful. So thank you very much, Vedette. And so please keep sharing your thoughts. I'll do my best to share it with everybody. And the next person you're going to hear from is also the person who's going to become, in many ways, the face of the movement, because she has been appointed as the CEO of the not-for-profit company that will be hosting and running and facilitating the activities of the Human Bridge movement. So Nyeleti Magadze is a change leader and attorney by training with 25 years of experience. Her career spans across private, public, now civil society. She has a real gift to connect people and organizations across boundaries, the traditional boundaries of sectors. She works across these sectors, so at the moment she's working at Constitutional Hill as head of programs. I've heard from Tessa also about the amazing work that she's been doing there, and from Ian. And again, as I said to her yesterday, ChatGPT describes Nyeleti as a champion for justice, governance, and corporate transformation in South Africa. She comes from Limpopo, and your career is described by Chat as remarkable, Nyeleti. And And then the last part of the story, I'm loving these different perspectives. She said, it says, Nyeleti works tirelessly to preserve and advance our nation's democratic heritage, ensuring its stories resonate with truth and healing. Her unwavering commitment to equity and transformation, coupled with her passion for fostering inclusive dialogue, makes her an inspiring voice in the pursuit of racial healing and a more united South Africa. So definitely the best person to lead the movement. I'm so happy that Ian has found her and that she said yes to the invitation. And we look forward to hearing a little bit more from you, Nyeleti, just in terms of what's in store for us with regard to this movement.
Great, thanks, Louise, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, I guess ChatGPT knows me more than I know myself, but yeah, what can I say? Morning, everyone. Before I start, I have to acknowledge, ChatGPT did recognize that I come from the Boko Malamulele, to be specific. So I'd like to welcome my mother, who's on the call this morning. I'm very chuffed that she made the time to attend the session. And Ma, I know you hate me for saying this, but it's fine. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'm very proud that you have gotten me to where I am as my parents. I'm sure Papa is sitting right next to you, also trying to listen. I'm hazarding that guess. So what is this Human Bridge movement and what are we trying to do? Structurally, it is an NPO. And its main focus really will be creating and implementing and also supporting racial healing activities across the country. And I want to emphasize that all this will be done with everyone who is operating in this space. And the space of racial healing is not just about race and what race means, it's also about social justice broadly and about human dignity ultimately. So the work that we will be doing will not be firsts, it won't be new, but it will be more collaborating, coordinating, and also supporting those that are also doing this work whilst we also organize activities, which I will share later. I have to go and start with the preamble of our constitution, because we talk proudly about this constitution that we have, but I think we don't do enough to internalize, especially this preamble. I've had this preamble on my wall for the past probably 15 years of my career. Instead of my certificates of whatever degree I have, I've had this laminated and put on my wall because I felt like it was a job description of some sort for all South Africans. And I think with the work that I've been doing, and just to correct that, Louise, my work with Constitution Hill has now morphed into more a partnership around some of the work that I do on corporate immersions on Constitution Hill, and I'm not director of programs anymore. So just to draw your attention to something around our preamble and what it says and why this work is important, is that there's an element of recognizing the divisions of our past. And that recognition requires us to do a few things. It requires us to heal those divisions. And the work of this movement is to say, let's continue, probably even more deeply, heal these divisions, because although 94 came in the past 30 years, we all know that the wounds are still there and raw, and more than anything right now, we are more polarized racially as a country than we ever have been since 1994. And a fact about 94 for me is that, with the themes that Nina was talking about, she spoke about youth. I talk about young people, and the concept of young people for me is landed by the fact that in 1994, when we went into our first democratic elections, 14-year-olds back then are now 44-year-olds. They are leaders, they are making decisions, they're sitting in very important spaces where they could influence the direction of how we have these conversations and where we take this country. And therefore, the big pool, if we say our population is 60% and more young people. What does that mean in the definition of youth? And if we include those that are 44 and younger, that number is probably even bigger. So our job is big here, and it's not to talk at them, but to talk with them and to get these young people in the room as well, and to understand what these divisions of our past are and how we start healing them. And the reason why we do that is that we can improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. And for me, that is very important, and that is why this movement is critical. And this is a personal journey that everyone has to go through for themselves. And I've gone through it myself, and I still am. And today it's landed me here today with this work that I'm trying to do. Next slide, yeah. So what do we aim to achieve with this movement? There are two elements that Nina spoke about when she spoke about the theme of complexity, to say we move away from the or and into and, that complexity is about holding two views and being able to accept that they both can be true at the same time, and that it's not one or the other, because that makes us think more linear than we would if we think about and it could be a collective of ends. So the one element of the movement that we want to look at is, if racial healing assumes integrated societies, and that South Africa is not yet integrated as a society, what do we need to do? Those two things that Nina mentioned, one is about shifting mindsets at an individual level, individuals who then form organizations, who are part of government, who are part of communities. And if the conversations are around starting to shift those mindsets, starting with I've learned this concept. I think I've had Prof Nina de Klerk mention the concept of justice for me, justice for us, and justice for all. There's no way anyone can fight for justice for all or for us before they get it for themselves. And I think this journey of conversations and shifting mindsets has to start with the me or the I before it can go into the us and into the all. And that's more around the first element that you see here. The next element is the whole systemic change, to say, once you've shifted the mindsets of individuals who form parts of systems, who are law makers and policy makers, who will be responsible for integrating societies and communities, who will be responsible for making sure that everyone has access to resources, then the combination of the two gives us the outcome, which is in the last bucket here, of racial equity, which Ian, if you can just press next there, gives us this outcome of racial equity, where resources and opportunities are required to reach an equal outcome, so that people are not treated as the same, which is what equality is about, but more equity, that people are treated based on what their needs are, which is the big difference between equity and equality. We voted in '94, that gave everyone with the right to vote, the equality of one man but one vote. But at that point, there was a lot of inequality that needs to be addressed, and that's part of what we would like to address and have this outcome through this movement. Next slide, yeah. And therefore, the movement is about a few things. One of them is to open all South Africans to participate in racial healing conversations and activities. This is where the I comes in, is to bring awareness on the importance of racial healing in South Africa, because we tend to let it take the back seat more and more when we haven't done the work, and to also enable not just civil society, but every formation to engage on racial healing with the communities and as part of the work that we all do, not as an addition, but as an underlying foundation for those conversations. And it also provides a platform for South Africans to participate and adopt in activities relating to racial healing in your own spaces. And so what are the few activities that we have thought through? And if you do read the book, you will find that some of them are there, and there's a lot of detail around them. The workspace, as we know, is one of the places where there's a lot of people who are caught from different backgrounds, who can influence the conversation around racial healing and creating this human bridge to racial equality, racial equity, and that we believe workspace programs are important for this movement to participate, for corporates and organizations to participate in. Then the next activity is around government and civil society, that there are training programs that are available for leaders, for government and civil society leaders to start human bridge circles in their own context and what they mean for the work that they do, and how especially government can then have the right policies and implement them, because I think one of our failures in our country is not just having not having policies, but is how we implement these policies meaningfully. Another activity is around educational institutions, especially our schools, our colleges and universities. And for us, this is important because if you catch them in the workplace, sometimes it is too late. You know, this is a conversation that has to start early. We've seen the polarization that's happening in our schools and how it's playing itself out. And we can't sit and watch and expect that those young people who are having these struggles in these institutions or who are grappling with these issues will come out and become members of society who contribute meaningfully if we don't deal with some of these issues at source, which is at schools, colleges, and universities as well. Next slide, please. And then the next activity is around marketing and awareness. Because this is a movement, and as opposed to just an organization that's deciding to do a particular work, a movement is about a collective. And as a result, marketing and awareness of the movement itself is very important, and that we have to make sure that this movement is put out there through summits, conferences, webinars like this one, and also the power of social media, and hopefully over time develop what we call a human bridge museum as well. Another element that we think is very critical, and as South Africa have this gift of the creatives and the arts, but we don't use it, in my belief, enough to tell the stories. Storytelling is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do because it leaves people with a feeling. Not only do you hear what you're seeing, you end up feeling something about what you're watching through the arts. And we think we should use the arts a lot more in this healing journey of ours, because that's where, you know, Nina spoke about the hurt needs to be heard for healing to happen. How do we hear the hurt? One of the best ways, I think profound ways of doing it is through the arts as well. And then three more activities that are quite important. Fun activities, you know, this is very much hard work. It's long-term. It takes a lot out of you generally if you immerse yourself in it. So it's also important to do fun stuff and fun activities around it, and just mobilize people differently so that we say it's not just about the hard work, it's also about fun activities that we can have around this work that we're trying to do. So things like annual walks and races and kind of social media challenges and activities that are fun. And then the other activity is around using what we have as part of our history as a country, not to get us stuck or to paralyze us, but to give us context that will help us move forward. When I said a 44-year-old today who was 14 in 1994, if they don't get immersed to understand the context of the history that we come from, what are the chances that some of these mistakes could be repeated simply because we haven't learned enough about the history to help us move forward in a meaningful way? And one of those places, like Louise said, is Constitution Hill, which has a very strong and painful history, but we ended up with our Constitution Court there, and it now holds this contrast and complexity of our country. And it's about the place where atrocities and the highest place of injustice historically during colonialism and apartheid, and now it's become the highest place of justice with our Constitution Court. How do you hold those two truths together as and rather than one or the other, and be able to work with both and learn from both and say, this is how we can move on as a country? And the last activity on the next slide, Ian, is around personal learning. The journey starts with I, and we're hoping to put programs online that people can go through this journey on their own as an individual, saying, this is what it means for me. This is how I can start my own conversations with my own family, you know, starting with where we are every day and saying, how do we get used to having these conversations meaningfully so that we can go out there into our communities and engage with those conversations meaningfully as well, especially taking our children along with us on this journey without talking at them, but talking with them and allowing them to lead. I always say I'm trying my best to see the world through the eyes of my children, because they are the future rather than through my own eyes, because I'm becoming more and more part of the history. And yeah, those are the activities. And the idea is for everyone to look at these and say, where can I play a role? What is it that speaks to me? How can I start participating? We always think these things are meant for people who make big decisions, but actually it starts with where we are. And if you consciously think about where you are, you'll realize the kind of influence that you have and the kind of decisions that you are able to make, even if it's in your own household, and therefore how you can start this conversation as an individual. All of us who are on this call today are privileged, whether we like it or not. And the responsibility of taking on these conversations lies a lot more with us than those that are still feeling like they are on the outside watching the South Africa movie, but not necessarily participating in it. Thank you. That's it from me, Louise.
Thank you very much, Nyeleti. You would have all all of you will have seen there was a QR code that showed up, but we'll come back and we'll show you that QR code again. It is an invitation for you to get involved and share your details and let the team know that you want to be part of this. So I've already got a sense of the richness of the conversation we will be having after we've heard from Tessa. I am going to ask Ian and Nina and Nyeleti to have a look at those amazing questions that we have in the Q&A, but we'll come back to that after hearing from Tessa. Now, for those of you who were watching the television yesterday after the announcement of what happened in the US, you would have seen Tessa's face. We see Tessa regularly. Tessa shows up when there's challenging conversations to be had. Chat specifically, when I asked ChatGPT around Tessa, because I wanted to make sure that I get all the perspectives, specifically mentioned Tessa's book, Colored. Her book that she co-authored says how classification became culture. And it's an invitation to understand the complexities of identity and community resilience. An amazing voice to have in this conversation. And so, Tessa, thank you for making the time to join us today. And thank you for saying yes to be part of this journey in some way. We're not entirely sure what that would look like, but we are absolutely delighted that you are a part of this journey. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Louise, and everyone for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. I hope I've done all the things right in terms of the tech and that there isn't an issue with that. Yeah. Great. So I want to talk about what I think about when I think about a movement around race, racial healing, and change. And firstly, I want to just think about the word healing and what that looks like and what that implies. There's no healing that happens if we think about if you have an ailment, a physical ailment. Physical ailments respond to action, and whether that action is a proactive thing that we do as the people feeling those ailments, what a doctor might do, what a nurse might do, or what our body does, it responds to action. And my sense has been that when we speak about social healing or racial healing in this instance, that we don't prioritize action. We prioritize how we feel over what we do. And so my first call to us in this conversation is, how do we prioritize action? Apartheid was not dialogued. We didn't dialogue our way into racial division. Colonialism wasn't a dialogue. Slavery wasn't a dialogue. All of those things were preemptive actions. I've been speaking to people in the social justice sector recently about the South African psyche and what we understand about what the majority of South Africans think about what kind of society we live in and what kind of society they want to be a part of. And it occurs to me that we think that we are going to teach people things, and that the social justice sector and NGOs has become about going out and we're going to conscientize people by teaching them things. And one of the things that my work, particularly at the Ribonia Circle in the last 2 years, has taught me is that consciousness is built best while we are taking action, not before. And so we are not going to teach each other things. We are best placed creating a new sensibility and different outcomes if we are taking action and learning from those actions, if we are proactive about it. The apartheid government legislated in a 10-year period in the 60s, over 100 race-based laws. Over 100 race-based laws in a 10-year period. They were serious about taking action. And they did not take those laws for public opinion. They didn't have to dialogue their way through it. And even many white people who were beneficiaries of those laws or co-opted into the system weren't told that what we're doing is we are racially discriminating. That wasn't the conversation. And so the conversation was about what outcome those people wanted for their lives and what future they saw for themselves. That's what drove the entire racist machinery going back hundreds of years. And so what's going to drive redress? What's going to drive, and I would take it beyond redress, and a reimagined society that is reconfigured to different kinds of relationships and different kinds of outcomes? It is going to take two things fundamentally. One, a very clear understanding of what kind of society we want to build in practical terms, not emotional or values terms only. And the South African story and conversation about the future was hamstrung to some degree in the 90s by a conversation about values. And while values are important, and particularly the ways in which that informed the Constitution, when we didn't agree on the material version of the society we wanted to live in, and the practical things that needed to happen for that to materialize, we got hamstrung by narrative, by mythologies, and by feelings. One of the things that I often think about is, what if we did not win the '95 Rugby World Cup? I suspect we may not have been distracted by this constant chase of a high to feel unified when we're actually not unified in our day-to-day lives. And so I want to ask us to please start to think about what the material, practical living conditions of the society we want should look like as the driving force behind why we do this work and how we do this work. And then the second thing that I want us to prioritize is, so firstly, it's vision and this very clear, crystallized material sense of what the world needs to look like. But the second thing is the question about, how do we participate in that journey together? How do we create space for that participation? What is our individual work and what is our collective work? Now, I'm going to share with everyone what I think our three biggest challenges are. in becoming a more racially equitable, just society. And then I'm going to share with you what I think an example or some examples are of what kind of future we could envision to get us to a more equitable, just society. And this, I hope, becomes a way for us to stimulate thought about what a movement would do, because a movement does not exist to exist. It exists to do something, right? So the first thing is inequality. The first challenge we face is inequality. South Africa has done really well in prioritizing poverty and unemployment, and even to a certain extent, issues around social rights, especially if you think about the progressiveness of our constitution. But what we have not prioritized in the last 30 years is a stark, real, deep, meaningful conversation and set of actions towards undoing inequality. We have taken for granted almost now that we are the most unequal country in the world. We say it without blinking. We say without blinking that, you know, people are divided and that people live in vastly different conditions. We say without blinking in a country where the majority of the people on this call could not imagine or can imagine, let me put it that way, today spending 1,500 Rand on a meal. And what we're calling for in terms of a basic universal income grant is 1,500 Rand for people to live lives, full lives. We take for granted those disparities. We take for granted that earning 25,000 Rand a month places you in the top 15% earners in the country. We take these things for granted. And we don't think about what their import is, their practical import on the kind of things and the ways we live our lives. And maybe one of the starkest ones that show us we've not done the work to undo apartheid is spatial inequality, is spatial injustice. We are today still living in apartheid's very well-designed architecture of inequality in terms of spatial planning and housing. At best, in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were talking about giving people proper housing within this unequal spatial terrain. We're now starting to have conversations about transport systems that link these unequal spatial terrains with each other. But there's a fundamental difference between saying you get to live in an area where it's basically a housing reservation, and there's no amenities, there's no access to quality services, there's no access to quality schools, and more importantly, there's no access to economic opportunity, but we're at least going to give you a structure to live in. And then over time, not even deliver on services in those structures, but different story. And then say to people, but you still are going to have to travel 4 hours each way, or 4 hours cumulatively, 2 hours each way, every day in order to make a living. Because we're not going to build a society where you are to the same level of where somebody else is. A white friend of mine, one of my mentors, said to me that, and this was while I was in varsity, really trying to understand South Africa. He said to me, whiteness is designed around an approximate 10-minute rule, where the majority of the way white people live their lives, they can get to the things that are important to them more or less within 10 minutes. That's the majority of the white experience. The majority of the Black experience in South Africa is that the thing that is most important to your ability to live, your job, is an hour or two away. That's the impact of racism and racial injustice. And that's what you have to focus on if you want to redress. That's how practical it needs to get. But that's what inequality looks like. Inequality also looks like creating and designing worlds for one group of people and not for others. And that's my second issue, which is inclusion. Inclusion has to mean more than you have a say or you have the prospect of being able to do something that your forefathers couldn't do before. The prospect is not enough. It's just saying that somebody could now be a Black billionaire. Not that I want people to be Black billionaires, but just saying that somebody has the prospect to live a better life does not mean that you are enabling them to do so. And this is what we're going to have to get, particularly people of privilege and particularly white people in South Africa, to understand. That we cannot continue to have conversations as if race doesn't matter. And I know that there's this contention around not wanting to blame people today for what they didn't do. But this is not about blame. It's about benefit. That even if you did not contribute to the situation that has given you privilege, you are benefiting from it. And you must understand that you have normalized that benefit because you don't know anything else. When a world is designed for someone, they take for granted that their ability to navigate that world is common sense and normal and based on their own ability. So as a short person, when I go to America, which is designed for large people, for big people, for tall people, I recognize that this was not made for me. So of course I'm going to struggle. And for tall people, they only remember that it wasn't made for me when I tell them, hey guys, those tall shelves are not for me. They were designed for you, not for me. And so part of what has happened historically is that societies, economies, spatial planning has been designed for particular groups of people that normalizes that experience for them. And so when they look at other people not being able to live those same lives, they think there must be something wrong with those people and those people's abilities to live those lives. And that's what privilege is. Privilege is when you assume something that isn't actually normal for everyone is normal. And that's not your fault that you assume that, because that's your experience. But we're going to have to look past our own experiences and problematize our experiences about how we got to what we believe as normal to be normal when other people are unable to attain that normal. And that inclusion has to mean that we have to design a world where there is a normal that everyone can attain. And so we need to figure out what is the minimum standard of life and dignity that we will not tolerate anyone living below. What is the minimum standard of life, dignity, and economic opportunity that we will not tolerate anyone living below? And we must all decide to pursue that standard relentlessly. And when we see that that standard is not attainable to people, and we are living far above that standard, we must ask ourselves, is there something I'm going to have to give up for someone to get that minimum standard below which no one will live? And that's going to require the third thing that I think we have an issue with, which is imagination. Right now, the world has a problem of imagination. We have all gotten stuck in a status quo, in a norm about the systems of democracy, the systems of the economy, the systems of governance that we've lived in the last 30 to 60 years, depending on where you are in the world. And so there's been a normalization of these systems and these processes, and we just feel like as long as we tick the boxes of these systems and these standards and the systems work optimally, then everything will be fine. The systems can work optimally and still have bad results. That's how I explain what's happening in America, is the system is working well, but it's not necessarily producing good quality of results. And our imagination is limited to what we have now must work well. And I'm saying that how we get to a different society, a better society, is to question the very systems we have now and ask ourselves, do we have a responsibility and capability of imagining new systems for a new kind of society that is built for everyone rather than for some? We have a lack of imagination. We are still chasing the past. That's why Make America Great Again resonates with so many people. They're chasing what has been, not what can be. And part of our responsibility is to start imagining different better. That better isn't just living up to the systems we have now, the ways of life we have now, but better might be that we need to challenge the way we are now for something different. And so I want to end with a provocation around how practical this could look. Thailand is a country that doesn't have a lot of issues around race and the kinds of divisions, identity divisions that we deal with. But I still want to use them as an example of how focusing on material change has an impact on how you build a society. And also that we build economies and we build a world for the society we want. We don't build society for the economy we want. So 20 years ago, the King of Thailand decided that no one in Thailand would ever go hungry, whether they lived there or not. That was going to be the standard that they were going to set for everyone. And how were they going to do this? Everyone was going to participate in that project. And it's a project everybody should be invested in, because the one thing we all have in common, despite whether we're rural or urban, whether we're old or young, whether we're black or white, is we must eat. And so the idea that we must all eat cannot be controversial. So what they did is they came up with a policy called the Kitchen of the World. And it had a few layers to it. The first one was to demarcate each village in Thailand and subsidize them to grow one crop and subsidize them to form cooperatives around those crops and invest in the rural development it would take for them to sustain the businesses that come out of that. Then they realized there's a logistics need if you want to distribute those crops for commerce. And so they invested into infrastructure. They invested into the logistics industry. Not only do you have more jobs now, but you also have an impetus for public infrastructure. Then they realized they don't want to just ship these things off raw. They should start processing them. And so in the cities, they invest in agro-processing. Now, all of these things are done in a way that is blind to identity markers, other than I am from here and I'm committed to this project. And that's what they invest in. And the final part of it is the tourist market, where they start looking at restaurants and the tourism space and how to encourage people to be part of that. And so I want to land the plane by saying, what we learned from the Thailand story is that you start off with a goal that everybody can get behind, that is practical and is about everyone. And secondly, you invest in that for anyone who is willing to participate in that goal, for everyone. Even when you have food, you participate in the goal in solidarity with those who don't, to make sure no one goes without food. In the South African case, I think that there are many things that we could do something similar around if we are serious about an action-driven project of solidarity, of unity, of breaking down identity divides, etc. The first one, and I'm going to mention only 3 from my vantage point. The first one is hunger, similar to the Thailand story I just told you now. 20 million people are food insecure in South Africa as we speak. 1/3 of our population is food insecure. The majority of those people are Black. The majority of those people are young. The majority of those people are women. If we want to have a racially just society, that seems like an obvious place to start. The second one is health. And by health, I don't just mean healthcare, but I mean well-being in broader senses, safety, security, and the ability to access healthcare as well. Again, it's a basic fundamental need, and it's something that everybody deserves no matter where they are. But I think it has ripple effects that could be really useful. And then the final one is housing, and I've already spoken about spatial planning, so I won't belabor this point. But I want to land housing back to the question about the racial justice project that we want to embark on. One of the main reasons why we are seeing a surge in racialized politics and ethno-national politics is because politics is mobilized at the local level. For as long as the local level is based on spatial planning that the apartheid government set up, our political mobilization will follow exactly along those lines as well. And so I think there's a lot to be gained from looking at practical things to do rather than conversational ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessa. I always enjoy listening to Tessa. So, from my personal experience after 14 years of Partners for Possibility, where we were working in schools, I can just absolutely agree, Tessa. It's not about talking, it is about doing. It's about getting involved. It's about mobilizing around specific goals. So unfortunately, we've all been looking at the questions, and what I'm going to ask the panelists to do is to each just respond to 1 or 2 of the questions that kind of struck you as you were looking, and we'll do it in the same order that we started. Just any response to the questions that you feel that you are able to give justice to in a few minutes. And then Nyeleti has committed to take these questions, process them, make sure that we convene further conversations to deal with them. And that's why, if you could please put your phone on that QR code and complete the questionnaire, that would be a fantastic start. We will also send the link to the Google form to the people who've registered to attend. We do want to move from talking about a book to actually get involved in moving things forward. So with that, we'll ask Ian and then Nina and Nyeleti and Tessa to each respond to 1 question, because we do have a hard stop in 10 minutes, but we do want to hear all of your voices. So Ian, if you could start us off and share with us any responses to these amazing questions that people have posed.
Okay, thanks, Louise. I'm just looking at Stuart Pennington's question. Has there been no racial healing since 1994? Has there been no improvement in goodwill between races over 30 years? If there has been, is this acknowledged in both the book and your intended workshop? Very good question, and a bit of a challenge to us in that we are looking always at the issues and the problems that we have and how to work on racial healing. And to be honest, we haven't spent a lot of time and focus on answering the question, what healing has taken place so far? We just feel whatever it is, and there definitely has been, of course, there has been some healing, but there's a lot more to come. I don't think that we've really just, we've just scratched the surface as far as I'm concerned. And in the workshops, we will recognize that, but we will still stay very focused on what still needs to be done.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. It's lovely to see so many names of people that I know in the questions. I wish we had time to respond to all of them. But thank you, Stuart. Nina, any of the questions that you want to respond to in the little time we have?
Thank you, Louise. I'm actually delighted with, there are 33 questions. Some of them go deep. Some really will entice further conversation and reflection. And I think we should do justice to all of those questions, and perhaps there's an opportunity to respond to them all later. I just want to pick on one. I think it came from David Allen, which said, many of these goals are for government to change. Why not focus on communities? Well, I think that's the point I try to make, is that, it's best to start bottom up with individuals and communities and to fix the relationships, because I do believe systems are the outcomes of healthy relationships. So I actually do agree with what you say, and I don't think the process should start top down by changing the systems. I think both of these processes are equally important, and I think we've left some of these priorities behind. We think we can change systems. We've established a government of national unity, but we still need to do a lot of work on fixing the relationships between the political parties for that system to become a sustainable and working and effective system. So that is, in short, my answer.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'd just like to mention, just in case people are looking for a website, it's still under construction. The Human Bridge website will be up hopefully within the next few weeks, and we'll let everybody know when that is there. So please, in the meantime, if you have any things that you'd like to contact us about, please just send an email to info@hatchinstitute.co.za that you see there on the screen. But we'll be up and running soon. I wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Tessa, I hope you are reading all of the notes of appreciation for you and your contribution. But before we go back to Tessa for the last word, Nyeleti, any thoughts from you? And if you want to say something about your plans with regard to the questions, that would be great.
Yes, thanks, Louise. So I think for me, that there are 33 questions in the Q&A is a great thing, because it means people feel that this is a topic to engage with. This is a movement to think about and to engage with. The one question that I think maybe I'll kind of hazard a bit of a response, albeit not in too much detail, is one around whether this could be seen as yet a club of people with a similar mindset who start these conversations, when actually there are others who are opposed to this kind of a conversation, and how are they brought in? A movement is an open call. That's why the awareness about its existence is important, and that even the voices that don't necessarily agree with us should be part of the conversation, because that's where the change comes, and that's where the imagination that Tessa spoke about will come from. And I think the second thing is to seriously consider those actions that are common to all of us, that can't really polarize you if the reality on the ground is clear for everyone. So I think getting ourselves to those actions that are not polarizing in nature, but address racial inequality, I think would be a good sense check for us as we build the movement. And as far as how we deal with the questions, I think what we'll do is, there are some questions that are kind of belong to a particular theme. So we'll create themes based on the questions that are asked, without diluting any question, put those questions under a theme and put a response to it. We will share it on the platform once people have shared their details. But the reality is this is the beginning of a conversation that will be driven through actions as well. So definitely early in the year, we'll have another convening and we'll start where we ended here, which is dealing with some of these questions and getting into, so what are the actions that we believe this kind of movement should look at and focus on, and how do we build the movement meaningfully and become imaginative in the way we think about this movement. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nyeleti. And I just want to say to those of you who are looking for the book, someone did put a note in that says that they were able to find the book on Take-A-Lot. So we've got the book, the bookstore that Rudy mentioned earlier, and then definitely available on Take-A-Lot. So Tessa, you have you've given us a lot of food for thought in addition to the food for thought from Ian and Nina and Nyeleti. Do you want to give us your last final thoughts before we end this call?
Sure. So somebody asked about the work of the Rivonia Circle and what I've learned from this that might be, or from that might be applicable to what we're talking about today. And it actually also dovetails with the question about, isn't this the work of government, what I was talking about? And actually, I've learned that this is not the work of government alone. It's the work of all of society together. When we decided in 1994 that there's things that government does and things that everybody else does, that's when we made a fundamental error. Democracy means that the people shall govern themselves, which means all of us must co-govern on all issues at all times. And so what we did at the Rivonia Circle, we stumbled upon the way people could co-govern almost accidentally through a project we call the Democracy Builder. We've done about 100 democracy builders across the country. And it's a simple one-day workshop that has 4 components. One is we have people have a conversation about what they think democracy, governance, and politics means as a lived experience, what the priority issues are they would want to solve for themselves. And then we do an exercise we call South Africa 2.0, which is kind of on my t-shirt. But we go through an imagination exercise and we ask people to themselves start thinking about what a better South Africa would look like, and to do that with other people so that you start creating the sense of a joint shared vision and an imagination of something else that's possible. And that's always been the catalytic moment in our workshops, where we find that people have so much thought that democracy is about outsourcing their view on what society should be to somebody else, that once people are given the opportunity to do it for themselves, they realize that they have the capacity and the responsibility to be part of setting the agenda for what the future should look like. And I would add to that quickly, that also should be how we approach elections and who we elect. The elections that we do are too much about waiting for a party to come and present a vision of the future to us, rather than us in society setting forth a vision and then demanding of parties to meet the vision we have, rather than the one that they can have the imagination for. And then the final part of the days are about a half an hour max, where we ask people to put together a 6-week project in their own community. Out of 100 communities that we've been to, 60 of those projects have been successful, and over half of those have gone beyond the 6 weeks into a year or 2. And those projects have not been outside of what I'm talking about today. And I'll tell you of 2 of them that address hunger and health. One was, well, actually not one, 9 of them are community farms, pig farms, chicken farms, and vegetable farms. Community farms, and this was people responding to hunger, not jobs. Jobs were a consequence, but they were responding to the question of hunger. And I'll one day tell the story of the first community who taught us this. But we've seen a farm in the Northwest that has been going, a chicken farm that's been going for 2 years now, that was started by a group of students based on a democracy builder. And the second one is health. In Naturina, there's a community that had a plot of land the government gave them 27 years ago with the promise of a clinic. Within 5 weeks, they got government not only to deliver a mobile clinic, but also to give them staff, and they have, at least the medical staff, and they have been staffing the auxiliary functions of that clinic for 2 years now. When I say that it is all of our responsibility and all of us could play a role if we had these kinds of common goals, I really do mean all of us could play a role. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Ian, for your leadership. Nina, for your beautiful contribution. Nyeleti, as someone said in the Q&A, you have your work cut out for you, but we are with you and we are joining you on this journey. Thank you for saying yes and for being courageous enough to do that. For all of you on this call, thank you very much for joining us today. You will hear from us. You'll probably hear from Nyeleti as a starting point. But there will be more conversations, more opportunities to invite others. Please feel free to share the recording that you're going to be getting with other people. We'll try and get it loaded on YouTube so that it's easy to share. And stay in touch, and please do what you can in the next few weeks until we get together again to start to create the South Africa of our dreams, South Africa 2.0. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day.